Welcome. Let's talk about the questions from GS paper 2 2019. Now, most of the questions were related to constitution, the changes that have been brought about in the constitution. So, if you have covered the NCERT 6 to 12, most of the questions are very direct. Besides that, you need to have certain contemporary information on the cases that have been lodged, certain articles and amendments that have been brought about. So, the first question talks about, do you think constitution does not accept the principle of strict separation of power? Rather, it is based on the principle of checks and balance. Now, here you have to focus on the three pillars: the executive, judiciary, and the legislature. You have to explain how these three pillars have been working. The power of the executive has been exercised by the president. You have the power of legislature, which is in the hand of parliament, the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, and the president together, along with the legislative body for execution of the decision. And then you have judiciary, which looks upon the cases and sees whether you have certain processes which are going smoothly or not. Under this, you have judicial review. The process of judicial review under Article 32 and 226 empowers the Supreme Court and the High Court to see whether the constitutional validity of the executive and the legislative actions are correct or not. So there has been a doctrine of separation of powers, in a sense that the modern system, the political systems, runs on the federal as well as the federal system, where you have the center as well as the state, which is important, but it also brings an emphasis on the checks and the balances that one has on another. And this is why this is important, is very important to understand, and that is to prevent any kind of abuse of power or the problem of upholding of the rule of law. The next question is, the Central Administrative Tribunal, which was established for redressal of grievances and complaints by or against the central government employee, is exercising its power as an independent judicial authority. Now, under the part 14A of the Constitution, you had the 42nd Amendment that was brought into account, and this 47th Amendment 1976 has been very important, which administers the administrative tribunal for bringing about the issues of various dispute resolution that has been there. Now, this CAT, which is known as the Central Administrative Tribunal, is an independent, it acts like an independent judicial authority, where it performs its duty free of influence and control by any other actors. And this is a statutory body that is there. There have been various technical issues which are related to it, and the recent High Court decision is something that you need to address into it. Now, you, for a question like this, you need to bring out both the positives as well as the negative, and say how do you think it is working as a truly independent judiciary body. However, it is not meant to be so. The next question talks about the methods used by farmer organization to influence the policymakers and how effective those are. Now, definitely, when you have trade unions, farmers organization, their main idea is to create awareness, generate much more campaigns, much more organizations, political meetings, create pressure, file petitions, create lobbying, and the lobbying pressure is there. Bring in much more activism, focus on the recent trends that have been there, and how a desirable situation could be brought into consideration. But this, on the other hand, creates unrest in the society. There could be short respite for the farmers, but in the long run, there could be drastic measures that could definitely affect the growth and the development, not only for the farmers but also for the country as a whole. There have been various policy issues that have been taken into account for implementation purpose. The next question talks about, from the resolution issues regarding distribution of legislative powers by the court, principle of federal supremacy and harmonious construction have emerged. Now, principle of harmonious construction, what it is? It basically talks about a provision where between the state and the center you have a harmonious relation. Let's take an example of GST nowadays. So half of the tax would go to the center, half of it would go to the state, and there is where you have a kind of harmonious interaction. You have the CGST as well as the SGST that has been talked about. You have the Gujarat University case 1963, which becomes important in this line. When it comes to federal supremacy, both the provisions fall under the state and the union list, but in that case when you have a concurrent list, or when you have the federal rule that is there, you would have a dominant legislative power of the center that would be taken into account. And there is where we say, despite of the principle of harmonious construction, there is principle of federal supremacy that exists, and the cooperative and the competitive federalism are other terms that you need to discuss during this answer. The next is what France can learn from the Indian constitution's approach to secularism. Now, when you are trying to find a middle path between secularism and a state sponsored religion, there is a difficult balance that need to be done. India, which has been considered as secular under the 42nd Constitutional Amendment 1976, we are focusing on a principle where we are trying to bring all the religions at an equal go. Now, French model does not support this. Where the state cannot give financial support to religious or ethnic minorities that are there, it does not support any kind of religious institutions, religious communities. The state tries to push the religion into a private sphere, and that is where a lot of difference arises between how India approaches secularism and how France has been approaching it, and what are the lessons that actually France can have from India's secularism. The next question focuses on, despite consistent experience of high growth, India still goes with the lowest indicators on human development. What are the issues that make a balanced and inclusive development? Now, unequal distribution of wealth has been one of the major reasons. You have non-inclusive growth that has been taking place, jobless growth, we would say, where unemployment is soaring to the highest ever. And in that line, we definitely have a poor marking on the human development indicators, because when you have jobless growth, it affects the employment and it affects the HDI, which focuses on literacy, education, and health as some of the basic parameters. So there have been reasons for lack of human development that we need to understand, and this state where you have mainly the issues which are related to the education, health, are some of the basic parameters that are affecting the human development, the educational status. And through the government schemes, through the government capital formation, the Skill India, the Digital India, Startup India, Ayushman Bharat, we are trying to bring in much more inclusive growth into it. The next question focuses on, there is a growing divergence in relation between poverty and hunger. The shrinking social expenditure by the government is forcing poor to spend more on non-food essential items and squeezing the food budget. Now, this is something very, very simple which could be brought from the Todaro's rural-urban migration model. So you can just go back and refer the class on Todaro's rural-urban migration, where economic incentive is one of the thrusts. Now, like understand what happens is, people start to move from rural area to urban area. But while moving to the urban area, let's say a person earns 10,000. Of that 10,000, he might be spending a decent amount on transportation, moving back to his village off and on, talking about the residents, kind of livelihood in the urban area, sustaining the family in the rural area, and then there would be other costs that would be incurred in line to this. And all these costs what would happen is, the net amount that he is left with might be very, very meager, and with this meager amount, what he would do is, he would try to cut his food budget. Now, food budget when cut would turn out to be on a high carbohydrate diet, which is relatively cheaper to find, and this would again lead to issues, health issues, where you would have obesity as one of the issues that would be registered. So food budget squeeze is a result of higher expenditure on non-food essential items. So transport becomes an essential, getting a place for residence becomes an essential thing when a person is moving from a rural area to an urban area. So rent is a significant proportion for that, and there is where there is a divergence between the poverty and hunger. So it's neither poverty nor hunger, but still you have the food budget that squeezes up, and that's one of the reasons for it. The next question is, implementation of ICT based projects suffers in terms of vital factors, which is mainly in the terms of implementation. First of all, we have a very low digital literacy, low digital awareness, low technology friendly common people, we could say. There have been lack of common service centers that are there in the villages. errors in the technology, omissions of the technology. You might witness every 3-day weekend, every off and on weekends, you would register server breakdowns from the banking, where you have digital transactions that become difficult. Privacy concerns are there, data theft, cyber security are some of the issues. Then you have weather related problem, where sometimes the poles break down due to gusty winds that could be seen. So all those which are small to jot down but really significant factors affect the infrastructure. Once you have a poor infrastructure, you would have to invest more on the capital formation and economic formation. And therefore, what is required, what is need of the hour, is to change the design of the infrastructure that you are trying to provide. Might be, rather than overhead, you would have to provide underground pathways, bringing in much more digital literacy, digital awareness, private sector organizations, participation of private sector, which could run much more smoother and much more streamlined as compared to a government organization. And the role of civil societies and awareness should be there. The next question is, the time has come for India and Japan to have a strong relation with global and strategic partnership to affect the world as a whole. Now, cooperation between India and Pacific has been a long time goal. We have been focusing on Look East policy, and what this Look East policy is, a free and a kind of open Indo-Pacific strategy that would be there, strengthening India's and Japan's relation with the ASEAN nations, bringing in much more freedom of law, freedom of navigation, freedom of movement. Asia Africa Economic Growth Corridor could be one of those. And then we have the Quad nations that is again in news these days, and that is Japan, US, India, and Australia combined together to counter China. And that is where you have the coordination 2+2 strategy that works on. So bringing in much more economic developments that could be in the form of Delhi Mumbai Economic Corridor, running of bullet trains, Delhi metros is some of the examples. The last question in this set talks about too little too much politics leaves UNESCO fighting for life. The statement, with the light of US withdrawal and accusation of the cultural body as being anti-Israel. Now this is where you have a lot of political statements that have come up. But yes, you have to start with how UNESCO started, what was the initial beliefs with which the foundations for UNESCO were laid down, which is a educational cultural body that has been there. With the financial crisis emerging later from 2011, you had the UNESCO, which voted to admit Palestine as a full member state that was part of it. And Washington basically responded by stopping the payments of nearly more than $80 million that were pending in dues. So this is a kind of story that started with, and later on there were cuts for the programs that were there. You had the Russia-Ukraine wars that were part of it, and then the acquisition of Kiev was another part that was the whole story regarding this. But yes, if it is too much political or too little political, definitely the UN bodies get hampered, and the process and the objectives through which they were established are affected. So those are some of the important points that you need to focus on while writing your answer, and be very sure, specifically for your GS paper 2, try to be politically neutral while attempting your answers. And that's one of the best strategies to have one of the good and a kind of bureaucratic answer that could be part of your GS paper 2.